All right, welcome back to the Walkoff. I'm proud to be joined by Jeff Pearlman, a best-selling author. You may recognize his books Showtime, which became the HBO show Winning Time. You may also recognize The Bad Guys Won, my personal favorite, about the '86 Mets. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me. How you doing?
Anthony, I'm good. I live in California, but I'm from New York, and it's nice to hear a guy with that kind of East Coast like little thing in his voice. I like that a lot. So it's good to talk to you.
Awesome, thank you. I always wonder when I'm talking to somebody, especially that's so passionate about writing and has such a which is a great career in writing. I don't mean to say that just because I'm interviewing you. You
Mhm.
really do have a really impressive career. I watch your TikToks all the time. Really cool stories. Where did that passion for your writing start? Was there a moment, like specifically, or was it just a gradual thing that you could really express yourself well in your writing?
Um, I think when I was a kid growing up, I grew up in Mahopac, New York, which is about an hour north of the city. And I used to go to the Mahopac Library all the time. And my parents, they didn't, no one in my family cared about sports except for me. So they didn't subscribe to Sports Illustrated for me. But I would always run to the library pretty much every week and read not just the new Sports Illustrated, but I dig through the stacks and read the old Sports Illustrateds. And it just brought alive this stuff I wasn't seeing at home. I grew up in a very white, conservative, sheltered town. And all of a sudden you're seeing pictures of like black ball players with afros and lamb chop sideburns and guys named Joaquin and Tito. And it was just like and big fat chains and like swagger and all that stuff. And like it just spoke to me. I don't know why, but it just spoke to me. And reading the magazines or reading the stories and all these great writers and the words popping off the page, it just did it for me. And I think that really was the start of my being inspired by writing and wanting to be a writer.
Yeah, I'm especially interested in Sports Illustrated, the portion of your career. I think you had really interesting, obviously the John Rocker, the whole story with that, everybody knows.
Mhm.
Um, I've watched some of your TikToks on the whole John Rocker situation. You described how what you were thinking when you were interviewing him, and he's saying all this crazy stuff. But when he started, I know you told the story of when he was driving and he made a racist remark at somebody that was passing a car you were
Mhm.
driving in. What was going through your head? I mean, what was? Did you think that this was just absolutely insane? Were you thinking? Maybe I don't just what did you think was going on?
I mean, the odds are, I mean, it's been a long time. That was 99. But I think
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing in my head was, holy crap, this guy's really opening up. And
Mhm.
the thing that's interesting when you're in that position, my dog is going crazy here. The thing that's interesting when you're in that position is it's not your job. It's not my job to debate John Rocker.
Right.
It's not my job to argue with him. It's my job to actually have him open up and to listen to him. So in a way, he was giving me a gift. Like he was opening up. He was being his true self. He was a racist piece of shit, but he was a racist piece of shit who felt comfortable speaking freely. So I think the number one thing as a writer that you train yourself to do is roll with it, right? Like if I were just talking to you and you said the things he was saying, I'd be like, "What are you, a fucking asshole?" But it's not my job to say that to him. It's my job to listen. So I think more than anything, it's like, all right, stay focused, keep listening, ask follow-up questions. You don't agree with him, you don't like you're not egging him on, you're listening to what he's saying. And that's just kind of how you roll with it.
I also thought it was interesting you talked about how you kind of felt badly some of the pushback that he got,
Mhm.
especially right afterwards. He got a lot of obviously a lot of Hank Aaron came out and talked about it, all that stuff. But here we are 25, 26 years later, and he's on X Twitter still spouting the same racist crap, and he's even attacked you. Do you still feel that same way? Because if it were me and the guy grew and said, you know what, I was wrong, and he was matured, it would be one thing. But the fact that he's in what, like in his 50s, 60s now, and still saying this stuff, do you still feel that way?
No, he's a douchebag. He every now and then I'm off of Twitter, but every now and then I look for research and inevitably I end up seeing what did this moron post. I don't know why. I'm like drawn to it. I'm like, he's really big on the Michelle Obama is really a man thing. Like that's his thing now. And that speaks volumes. I'm like, I think in my head, I always wanted like I actually always wanted like at some point we're older and we look back, that was, whatever. And he's like, I was an idiot. And I really but he's not that guy. He's the opposite. He's actually just a jackass and a racist, homophobic piece of shit. So like at some point you just have to believe who the guy is and you have to believe that he's not going to evolve. And if anything, he's probably gotten worse through the years. And the thing that's interesting is as you get older, he's in his 50s now. As you get older and you lose cultural relevance, especially if you're a former athlete or celebrity, there's something in you that clamors for it and will do anything you can to get it back, to get a piece of that, to get a taste of it. I've seen it with a million celebrities. And for him, I think that means returning to Twitter, X, and being even more vile and racist than he was when he was talking to me. It's kind of a remarkable metamorphosis. It's not an admirable space he occupies.
No, definitely. I mean, you've even through all the books you've written and everything, I'm sure you've came into contact with some interesting personalities. As a fan of the Mets, the '86 Mets, were there any stories, and this goes in general for any book that you wrote, any stories that were told to you that you couldn't get into a book, but you were like, man, I really wish people could actually hear about this?
Well, there always are, but most of the time you can't use them because they don't vet legally.
Oh, okay.
Like you may have some amazing story that someone tells you about some guy snorting coke at blah 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 2 a.m. But if you can't verify it and the person's still alive and it just doesn't line up, you can't use it. You're not going to use it. So yeah, I've had a lot of stories through the years, but I don't know. People ask me that, like, what are the crazy Met stories you didn't use? And I'm like, if they were usable, they're in that book. Like that book was a pretty, for me, it was I wasn't holding something back just because, hey, so there might be boring biographical stuff. There might be, maybe I would have liked some more background information on some of the guys if I could write it again. But overall, I didn't keep anything out.
That's fair. I mean, I didn't even think about the legal issue. That
Mhm.
makes sense. Um, Take me into the process of. I know you're writing a Tupac book right now, so
Mhm.
take me into this process. First of all, you come up with the idea. How do you even get started? Because it must be such a tall task to write what, like 250, 300 pages at least for a book, and you
Mhm.
have to come up with all these interviews. You have to come up with an arc of a story that you're going to tell. Just where do you start, and how do you actually get going and writing that book?
So I usually start on eBay, and I find everything Tupac related: old magazines, books, books about where he came from, books about people who were important in his life. I mean, like Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, just as an example. You find books on Suge Knight, find books on like Snoop and Dr. Dre and inner city Baltimore and Marin City. You find all these things and you buy them all, hopefully on the cheap. And then you start building up a newspaper library. I use this website, newspapers.com. And you build a library, a day by day library of Tupac's life. So literally, I would spend weeks going. He was born in 1971. So from really the time he was born, searching for Tupac, searching for his mother, day one, day two, day three, day four, and building up a collection of tens of thousands of articles. So you really want to have the biggest Tupac library you can find. And then you go through all that material and you start circling names, circling dates, trying to find this person, trying to find that person. You try to find old high school yearbooks, in his case, elementary school yearbooks. Then you start calling those people one by one, by one, by one, by one. And if you call 1,500 people, maybe you get 300 people to talk to you. Like it's not like everyone talks to you. Most people don't talk to you. So it's really a nonstop whirlwind of collecting information while at the same time using that information to track down people.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't even know how you do it, but honestly,
I
I'm
don't
not
know
when I
how
write.
either. Sometimes mentally, I feel like if I were like, if there was an equivalent, a physical equivalent, I feel like I would have no legs and no arms left. It just beats the crap out of you. It really
How much
does.
time on average are you given to actually write the book?
So usually what I do is I have about 2 years to work on the book. I go a year and a half of just research. So for a year and a half, I don't write a word.
Okay.
Then I give myself 6 months to write it. And inevitably at 5.5 months, I'm like, oh crap, I need another month. And I'll ask for another month. So usually 6 to 7 months, just every day of writing, which means sitting in a Starbucks or a Panera or some local coffee shop because I need that feel of interaction. For some reason, my head just needs it. Spending too much money on drinks and mediocre snacks and just trying to get 1,000, 2,000 words down every day.
Yeah, one of the books that I haven't mentioned yet, but the Bo Jackson book, and
Mm.
I've mentioned your TikTok again. I think your TikTok's fantastic.
Thank you.
Sometimes TikTok could be garbage in terms of content. You always have really solid sports stories, and even the times you're just talking about yourself, I find it very interesting. But anyway,
Wait, Anthony, are you saying I shouldn't start doing Taylor Swift lip syncs on
no, you
TikTok? I
should
think
not.
it may
No,
be
no.
turning that way.
I would
Okay.
advise against that. Yeah.
Okay.
But the Bo Jackson thing, he didn't even want to be involved in your book. And
Mhm.
then he tried to call one of the mom and pop bookstores you went to
Mhm.
try and stop you from appearing there. First of all, how hard was it to write the book without Bo Jackson himself being involved? I'm sure there was people that you wanted to interact with that said, well, Bo doesn't want me to interact with you. How was that process?
Actually, it wasn't as bad as you would think.
Okay.
I mean, it's never great. It's always easier if you can call people and be like, "Oh yeah, Bo's helping me out." But he kind of did me a favor though, because early on he did call me. I sent him a bunch of my books very early on with a note telling him what I was working on, and he called me one day and he basically said like, "I'm not going to help you, but I don't really mind that you're doing the book." So whenever I would call people, they'd be like, the first question is, "Does Bo know you're working on the book?" And I would say, "Yeah, he does. I actually spoke to him." And then if they want more, I'll say, look, he said he's totally fine with me writing it. He wasn't going to help me. He's a guarded guy, but blah, blah, blah. And that helped a lot. I don't think that was his intent in hindsight, but helped a lot. The other thing is I got really lucky because back in 1990, Bo Jackson wrote an autobiography. And by wrote, I mean he had a ghostwriter named Dick Schaap, who was a legendary journalist who died. And at some point in Dick Schaap's life, he donated all the transcripts of all his interviews he did with Bo Jackson in 1989 and 90 to the Auburn Library. And all these documents, all the transcripts, the tapes, and the printed out transcripts were literally sitting in a box in the Auburn Library. So I found out about it. I think I had to pay $200 and they shipped it to me, the printed out transcripts and the audio cassettes. So like I didn't get him, but I think I even got better in a lot of ways. I got him in his prime talking about all these things, and a lot of stuff didn't even make it into the original book. So that was gold. As for Bo calling the bookstores, I will correct you. He didn't call one bookstore. He called all 4 bookstores I was scheduled to speak at. And it's funny because these were not Barnes and Nobles. These were not giant. This wasn't Books a Millions. This was like, as I said in the thing, like Becky's Muffin and Book Emporium in like Florence, Alabama. They were small little mom and pop stores getting a weird call from Bo Jackson saying, don't allow this author to speak. And to their credit, they all allowed me to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even. Well, your first book, right, was Bad Guys 1.
Mm-hmm.
I know the '80s Mets are some of your favorite teams. Obviously, '86 in general. How was that process of actually getting that book? I know it wasn't your idea necessarily. It was an editor at Sports Illustrated, right? Was there any hesitancy there? Like, this is going to be a tall task for me. Did you immediately just jump in and say, you know what, this is going to be good for me? How was that process?
All right, so it wasn't an editor at SI. What happened is I was writing baseball. I was covering baseball at Sports Illustrated.
Okay.
And an editor, like an agent, a literary agent, reached out to me named Susan Reed and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "I don't know, maybe kind of." And she's like, "I just think there's a really good book in the '86 Mets." And I was 13/14 the year the '86 Mets won the World Series. Love that team, love that era. I'm from New York. There'd never been a book done on them. I mean, it truly was in hindsight, like this kismet, the perfect subject for me as a baseball writer, as a kid who grew up in New York, as a nostalgia guy, as a baseball writer for Sports Illustrated. So I was like, oh, that's great. And I got a book deal for it. Didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to report just from being at SI and my earlier career at the Tennessean. And I just threw myself into it. And I got really fortunate because Jay Horwitz is this legendary. He was the Mets PR guy for like 30, maybe 40 years, long time. And Jay is just the mensch of menches. And when I told him I was working on the book, he said, well, come by Shea. They were at Shea at the time. And I'll give you, we have all these binders from that season. So I went out there and he gave me all the articles from the '86 season. And I basically did the same stuff you do at SI, which is you report, you call everybody and just dive into it. And it was really fun. Sometimes things are most fun. It's kind of like if you ask LeBron James, what was more fun, playing for the Lakers last night or being 12 years old and playing pickup in Akron with your buddies? Like, I didn't know what I was doing. So that made it really fun. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm going to try writing a book and we'll see what happens. And I'm going to go to spring training and hang out with the Mets. That'll be fun. And it was great. So it was a cool experience.
Was there any missed opportunities? Maybe you were approached for a book and you said, maybe this isn't the right time for me now, but you look back on it now and say, actually, I should have done that, or no?
It's interesting. I've never really wanted to write a book with an athlete, right? Like it was never in my head to do that. But at one point I was on a list to do a book with Colin Kaepernick and I didn't get it. I don't know what happened. I think that would have been a really fascinating experience that I probably would have done. The other one guy who I found really interesting is Michael Vick. And I think years ago, he was looking for an author to write a book with him. I just find his story really fascinating. I think that would have been an engrossing experience for me. I don't know if these books would sell or not sell, but like, I'd say if I could go back and maybe push a little harder to try to get those, maybe I would have, but I don't really have any regret. I'm not just saying this career has exceeded every expectation I ever had. Like truly if you told me when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was write for Sports Illustrated. I never thought about books. That wasn't even a thing in my radar. If you told me I'd be on my 11th book, and if you told me that I would have a book become a TV show, not just a TV show, an HBO show, not just an HBO show, but an HBO show with Sally Field and Adrian Brody that I'd get to be in and my family would get to be in, there's a 0% chance I would have believed that would happen. And that's not a cliche. That is the truth. This career has exceeded my expectations times a trillion. So no, I don't have many regrets about career-wise.
And when you were approached for that, Lakers book Showtime. I have to imagine if it were me, I'd say, well, this is a great opportunity, but like, who's making it? First of all, I want to make sure my
Mhm.
work is presented in the right light, and second of all, who's going to be in it? So, what was that first process of when you were approached about it? What was that like, and were you just immediately ready to jump in and say, let's do it, or was there any sort of hesitancy there?
Yeah, so it doesn't really work that way actually. Which is it's a not very understandable uh, interpretation of how these things go, but it goes nothing like that. It's actually the opposite. Basically, someone comes to you at some point and says, "Hey, I really like." There was a screenwriter named Jim Hecht. He came to my house. Really nice guy. His only real big credit was Ice Age 2, right? Writing Ice Age 2, movie I've not seen. And he's like, "Oh, I love this book. I have a passion for it. I really think we could make it as something." And I'd had this happen before. And basically, you become an asshole and you're basically like, how much money am I getting from this? Because you know the odds of it happening are very, very low, like very low. So he gave me no money. He was just like a really eager and optimistic guy. And I kind of just fell for his optimism. And over the years, I mean, it took 8 years for that thing to happen. So, like, over the years, I'd get updates and I'd be like, it's not going to happen. More updates. It's not going to happen. Adam McKay wants to meet with us. I don't even know who that is. Well, he says there's a good chance of it happening. It's not going to happen. And then one day, I don't know, a couple of years ago, you're like, wow, this actually might happen. So it's never, you just hope it happens because you know it almost certainly will not.
Yeah, and one of your TikToks I also saw was about how the actual name of the show had to be Winning Time instead of Showtime because
Yeah.
of the streaming service that Showtime. Did you really push back? 'Cause I agree with you. It should be called Showtime. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be Winning Time.
No,
Winning Time is a weird. Like, did you push back and say like this is going to hurt the show?
no, I just said that sucks, but I don't know. I'm not a TV guy, so I wouldn't even know if it would hurt the show. I don't even know if it did hurt. It probably didn't hurt the show. Like, I don't think anyone really cared. I don't think mostly, I think names are a little bit overrated. Like, if a show catches on, a show catches on. Like
Hmm.
Game of Thrones, someone might say, well, that's a really stupid name, or what does that even mean, or blah, blah, blah. But the show caught on, nobody cares anymore, So, like, no, I didn't, whatever. It's not, I mean, it would have been nice because it was the name of my book was Showtime, but I didn't really care. Not
What
that
are you
much.
looking forward to in the future about after your Tupac book? Are there any sort of stories that you really want to get your hands on?
We've been having this debate in my house. I'm not sure what, I mean, my next book is just a little passion project I'm doing on the cheap. It's a memoir about my 2.5 years as a really bad, horrible, virginal loser reporter in Nashville back in the early 90s and how I knew nothing about anything. And so it's like, it's going to sell 5 copies. But then after that, I don't know, actually. I think it depends how Tupac sells. And if people are interested, if people like the idea of maybe me writing non-sports books. My son is like, you got to write Kanye. And I'm like, I don't know. He's insane. That might not be good. So I don't really know yet. I'll have to see. I don't know.
And Sing would probably make a good book though.
I don't know. A friend of Wright Thompson is this writer at ESPN, and we were talking about it, and he made a good point to me. He's like, writing about truly crazy people is actually really difficult and not that satisfying. And I thought, yeah, it's probably true. So I don't know.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment you mentioned you started out in Tennessee? You weren't too sure about yourself and your writing. Was there an interview or just a story you wrote that you said, "Okay, I'm getting the hang of this now. I'm becoming actually pretty good at this." Was there ever that sort of like, aha moment to you?
All right, so it's interesting because it's not that I wasn't sure of myself. I was too sure of myself. Like I was
Okay.
way too cocky. I was a cocky little asshole. So like when I was a young writer, I thought everything I did was great. I thought I was the best writer on the planet. I thought I was going to be like the biggest superstar in writing, a thing that doesn't actually exist. Like I didn't listen to people. I was insufferable. I was annoying. I was a know-it-all. I turned down the chance for mentorship. Like I was a catastrophe, a walking catastrophe. And actually what changed my life and my career as a journalist is I started the Tennessean as a food and fashion writer. I was terrible. I was moved to music. I was terrible. I did general assignment features. I was terrible. I couldn't stop making mistakes. Like I actually couldn't stop making mistakes. It was almost like a disease. It was like a catcher who suddenly can't throw the ball back to the pitcher. I couldn't not have mistakes in my copy. And one day my editor, a woman named Catherine Mayu, reassigned me to the police beat. And she said, you're just going to cover cops for a while. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, do not worry about writing. Don't worry about snazzy writing. Who, what, where, when, how, and why. Just get the facts right. Focus on reporting. Focus on sort of the doggedness of chasing a story. And do not worry at all about impressing us with your writing. Don't even sweat it. And that changed my life. that chance. Number one, because I was devastated to be kicked off of, writing features. And number two, because it taught me how to report. And I needed that in the worst possible way. So that would be the moment.
Did that kind of give you a lesson for the future of like take these opportunities that might seem like suck at first, but could actually lead to something? Did you think about that later on in your career and say, you know what, I'm going to take this opportunity that I don't want to really go into, but I was joined that police blotter many years ago and it worked out for me. Did that kind of give you a lesson later on in your career?
Now, it gave me more of a lesson, honestly. I don't think that ever occurred to me, actually, even though it would be a good narrative. I think more is what it did. I think I realized that, like, you come to realize there are a million people who can write a really good sentence or paragraph. There just are. There are a million people far better than me, people far worse than me. Like, a million people can write. But what separates you is your reporting. Like, I needed to go through all that to be the guy who calls 1,000 people for a book. Like, I did. I needed to go through that. I needed to go through that to be the guy who goes day by day through newspapers looking for what kind of beer Tupac liked to drink. Like, I needed to get the shit kicked out of me in order to figure out how to be a journalist. So it had nothing to do with like motivation. It had more to do with just being good at this or trying to be good at this job.
And I think one of the stories that involves John Rocker again, but that
Mhm.
it shows your passion for journalism and actually true journalism is you went back, you volunteered to go back to cover a Braves game, Braves Yankees, if I'm not mistaken, to cover him and to see him again.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know many journalists that would really do that today. I think most people would say, you know what, I'm just not going to go around, especially in today's social media age. I know you said that you just kind of went into it. You said, yeah, I was scared, but I went right into it. Was there ever a moment where you thought, I know this might be the right thing to do, but I don't want this guy to like really blow up on me?
Of course. I mean, I went down, but it's not like I went down because I knew it was the right thing to do. And there's this old thing there's this old thing in journalism where like accountability matters, which I
Right.
really do believe accountability matters. And but it's not like there wasn't a part of me that was hoping I wouldn't see him. Like I was probably hoping deep down I could say, oh, I made the effort. I went to see him, but he wasn't there. That's not my fault, blah, 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 blah. So like, it sucks. But I had a moment when I was a young writer at the Tennessean. And in fact, it's weird. It was one of my last stories ever. I did a story about a high school football player. I covered a football game, high school football game. Here's my dog. And I wrote about, it was Good Pastor Christian versus David Lipscomb. And I had a line in my story. It said, David Lipscomb quarterback David Kirkow had an up and down game. His passes were either way too up or way too down. And I didn't think anything of it. But that week, the Tennessean offices, the sports department, we were just getting call after call. Angry person, angry person, angry person. How can you write that about a high school kid? He's just a high school kid. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. I had an editor named Larry Taft, old crusty newspaper guy. And he's like, you need to go back. You're going to cover the David Lipscomb game this week, the following week. And I'm like, that's crazy. They're going to kill me. And he's like, you need to show your face. Like, that's accountability. That's journalistic accountability. It's one of the most important things you can do. You need to do it. So I go to the game, and fourth quarter, when you cover high school sports, you stand on the sidelines. I'm on the sidelines, and all these players from David Lipscomb surround me. And the quarterback comes up to me and he goes, don't you ever come around here again. And the funny thing is, that's the last sporting event I ever covered in Nashville, because I left for the Sports Illustrated in New York City a week later. So there's this high school quarterback who actually thinks he forced me out of the Nashville. But like, the lesson itself was really important to me. Like, accountability matters. Even if it sucks, even if you hate it, you have to at least give the person you wrote about a chance to fire off at you and let you know how he feels. So that's where that came from.
Is there almost a part of you that misses the days that I didn't even mention Newsday, but Sports Illustrated and Newsday? Is there almost a part of you that says, well, obviously you love writing the books that you write, but do you miss those days of covering teams, covering players? I almost feel it's a little bit more of a personal thing because you're covering, say, with John Rocker. If you were writing a book on the Braves, you wouldn't have nearly as much time with John Rocker as you did if you wrote that article on John Rocker.
Mm.
So do you almost miss that time a little bit or no?
I'll tell you what I miss. I had a discussion with a friend of mine the other day about this. I miss walking into a newsroom and the place is like buzzing. And you walk in the newsroom back in the day, like when I was at the Tennessean or even when I was at Sports Illustrated, you walk in and there are people everywhere and the TV monitors are on and people are like scrambling to get stories in, and you hear phones just going off and ringing, and you have editors running through yelling at people. And when I was at the Tennessean, they printed the newspaper in an adjacent kind of building, and you could walk over there and watch the papers coming off the press, and even just the smell of the ink on the new, it just, sorry. I miss that terribly. Like that was my jam more than anything. And like I love writing books, but I am a newspaper guy at heart. And like I do miss that sort of I miss that. That does not really exist anymore. And I miss it desperately. I feel like guys your age are coming into a business that is so drastically different. And maybe it's better in some ways, but even like picking up a newspaper and seeing your byline on the front page, it was the shit. And having a cover story in Sports Illustrated, like that was the shit. That was really exciting. That was like, mom, dad, guess what? This week I have the cover story in Sports Illustrated. Like that thing doesn't exist in the same way. It's kind of a bummer.
Well, I'm going to leave you with a kind of a cliche question, but I want to hear your answer since you've had such a
Okay.
long career and a really interesting career, in my opinion. What
Thank
would
you.
you say is the proudest moment? I know that's cliche, or maybe
Mhm.
there's a few moments, but there's a moment you look back on and say, man, like this was really good work, and I'm glad that this is part of my legacy.
Oh, it's easy actually. So, um, Winning Time becomes an HBO show. There's a premiere party at a classic old school Hollywood theater. My wife is out of town, so my kids come with me. So I'm there and I'm sitting with my kids, and it's in this big theater, and all these like Hollywood people are there, all these actors, famous people, blah blah blah, people from the show. And Adam McKay, the director, famous guy, tons of films, Step Brothers, and whatever, all these tons and tons and tons of movies. He's on the stage and he's talking about Winning Time before they're about to show the first episode on a big screen. And he goes, "This book would not happen without one." Jeff Pearlman, stand up, stand up. He goes, "This book would not happen without one of the great American sports writers of all time, Jeff Pearlman." And I stand up. I'm like really embarrassed. It's not my thing in that way, but like my kids are next to me and this thing is happening. And I've said this in a recent YouTube series I do. I was like, sometimes you just want to look cool for your kids and you want your kids to be proud of you and look at you in a certain way. And that was a moment. Like usually I said in this thing, unless you're like LeBron James, I don't think your kids think you're that amazing. But in this moment, I felt like they felt proud. I don't know. And that was kind of, for me, that was as good as it probably. The best thing about being a sports writer through the years, truly, is I've always been I've been able to be a stay-at-home dad. So like I have two kids who are now in college. I've been able to attend to everything. I was a class parent. I was a little league dad. I was everything you would want. I was able to do because of the schedule for this job. And I didn't know when I entered journalism that would be so awesome, but it's been killer.
Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time. You didn't have to do this. I really, really appreciate it. I want everybody to check out Press Box Chronicles. I know you have a new YouTube series, just came out with the first episode. Your Tupac book, obviously, coming out soon. You have such a long career of really great stuff. Anybody that's listening to this that loves sports, chances are you've written something that they'll like. I got to
I
say
appreciate
that.
it.
So,
Yeah, and I just want to tell you, and I'm being sincere about this.
yeah,
Like as I get older, I do fewer interviews just because of time constraints and all that stuff. And but like I was you. Like I was like, I totally dig it. Like I was hosting the Blue Hen Sports Cage at the University of Delaware, and I was scratching and clawing. And I love that you do this, and I think it says something about you. And I think you're probably going to go pretty far in this business. So keep doing what
thank
you're
you.
doing for real.
I
For real.
appreciate that. And you're always welcome back on if you ever be like to be back on. Open
All
door
right,
policy.
I
Thanks for coming
appreciate it.
on, Jeff. Really
All
appreciate
right,
it.
take care.
Take care.